Audio's on.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Kings Park Board of Education. If we could just stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you, everyone. So good evening and welcome to this special Board of Education presentation. After Dr. Egan's presentation, we will hear questions and comments from the community regarding the plan. Since this is not a regular board meeting, we ask that all remarks are directly related to the presentation. Any questions or comments not directly related to the 5-day hybrid remote plan can be addressed by privately reaching out to the board or Dr. Egan. In an effort to facilitate a productive conversation, we ask that remarks are civil and respectful. We understand the importance of this issue. Therefore, we have increased the time limit for individual comments to 5 minutes. At the end of your 5 minutes, you will be asked to conclude your thoughts. In an effort to ensure that we are able to hear from all community members, if you do not finish when asked, your microphone will be muted. So, Dr. Egan, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Nally, and welcome everybody. Yesterday and today was the annual NSCIS Winter Conference. NSCIS is the New York State Council of School Superintendents and the statewide organization that I belong to. This conference is typically held every March in Albany and attended by over 500 superintendents across New York State. This year's event was conducted fully remotely, a first of its kind. I mention this tonight because it was at this conference last March that we had an unexpected and very important guest presentation from a representative of the New York State Department of Health. The representative told the packed room of superintendents that we needed to get ready to implement our remote learning plans. That was March 2nd, 2020. That day, we learned what was occurring globally, mostly in China and Italy. According to my conference notes, 10 states were reporting cases in the US, with 32 people under investigation in New York. 13 days later, Suffolk County schools were shut down by executive order, with New York State schools following a few days later. I mention this tonight not to put salt in old wounds, but to point out how far we've come in a year. With state guidance that has been referred to as pea soup, we reopened our schools successfully in September at a time where many of us were concerned about mask breaks and mask wearing endurance. Anxiety levels were high. Together, our students and employees rose to the challenge, re-entered, and our schools have remained open. While not ideal for all, and certainly a struggle for some, we established a robust hybrid model and provided consistency these past several months, even during the second wave, where some days we struggled to keep our schools and buses both open and running. For the Kings Park Central School District, it was never about if we would be able to offer 5-day-a-week in-person instruction for all our students this year, but rather a matter of when and how. It was always about being prudent and responsible during this public health crisis. Over the past several months, the district has carefully tracked a variety of external and internal factors in an effort to establish a 5-day expansion plan on the secondary level that has a reasonably good chance of success. We know that few students learn best remotely, and it is without question that most students learn best in person. We know that many students, and adults for that matter, are struggling with mental health issues, and we need to maximize in-person instruction time for our students. I am happy that our local infection rate and number of new cases has continued to decline, and I am excited to present our expansion plan this evening. And I thank you, the Kings Park community, for your patience and support and for attending this evening's presentation. That being said, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, as I've mentioned several times, we began September with the RARE goal, where RARE again stands for re-enter, assess, remain, and expand. And again, this evening, I intend to explain how we are going to expand to a 5-day-a-week in-person instruction plan on the secondary level. If you're joining us for the first time, and I know many of you are, we're going to repeat a couple of things that have been included in previous presentations. If you have attended our prior meetings, there will be a little bit of overlap with what I presented in the past, but I thought it was important to point out a couple of important things for those that are joining for the very first time tonight. During the pandemic, one of my highest responsibilities is not only to provide for the highest quality of education possible, but also balancing risk and including health and safety risks and mitigation in those risks. And I'll give you a small, but I think very important example. Many of you obviously know me as your superintendent of schools, but I'm also a member of the local Comac Kings Park Rotary Club. In April, the Rotary Club wanted to donate 3 4x8 signs to the district and the surrounding area regarding COVID. You might have seen these signs in town. 2 of these signs were over by the high school, and 1 ultimately ended up on the fence at the Kings Park Fire Department. I had reached out to the fire department to inquire if I could put that sign on their fence. They were extremely cooperative. However, it became evident that the Rotary Club would need an insurance certificate to give to the fire department, showing millions of dollars in insurance to back up any potential issues that should happen with that 4x8 sign. The point that I'm mentioning is to complement the Kings Park Fire Department on their risk management, but also to point out that something as simple as a 4x8 sign to be hung on a fence does involve some risk and required the proof of insurance for $2 and $4 million respectively in various areas. In putting tonight's presentation and driving our thinking over the last several months, we have connected and read guidance with these organizations that you see on the screen: CDC, the New York State Department of Health, Suffolk County Department of Health, state and local fire marshals, which became important, and I'll get to that in a little bit more detail later in the presentation. Legal counsel in interpreting many of the documents that came from the CDC and the Department of Health. Our insurance reciprocal, our insurance carrier, which is nicer. And I'm extremely involved in the Suffolk County Superintendents Association, both on the county level, and I serve as the cluster leader of the Huntington-Smithtown Superintendent Cluster that extends from Smithtown to Cold Spring Harbor. And one of the biggest takeaways in dealing with all of these organizations is the quote on the bottom of the screen: "And being prudent is both critical and responsible." As we move forward, we wanted to make sure that with the school district in mind and risk assessment, that we were both prudent and responsible. One of the things that most districts were struggling with was the fact that we knew that the CDC was going to come out with new guidance in February. We didn't know exactly when that was going to happen, nor did we know exactly what that guidance was going to include. We were hoping that that guidance was going to provide for some clarity in a few important areas. What that CDC guidance did do was help to provide districts with a risk continuum. Since September, most districts have operated between lowest risk, where only classes were virtual, to some and moderate or medium risk, which is where we, for the most part, operated from September to the present day. Once we deviate from a cohort model, an A-B cohort, this does take us into a higher risk category. It doesn't mean we shouldn't go there. It just means that we need to be very mindful and make sure that we have various mitigation factors in place if we do choose to go there. We still have the same enduring challenges, and all districts have faced these enduring challenges, which include instructional space, dining, and transportation. And physical distancing ultimately has become the one single most important factor as school districts have worked to try to get more students in school more often. I'm going to go into those in a little bit more detail in a minute, one at a time. But a couple of important relevant factors that we've considered over the last couple of months in preparing to expand our instructional programs. Number one, the infection rate. During the second wave, we very carefully monitored that infection rate, which rose to as high as 12.8% in Suffolk County at one point. I'm happy to report that we've consistently been below 5% and actually much closer to 4% over the last several days, which is very, very important. Also, local COVID-19 metrics, and we typically get them from St. Catherine's and some of our other local health organizations. Employee and community vaccination rollout is very important, gauging where our employees are in terms of getting their vaccination, knowing that the new CDC guidelines do not require individuals to quarantine for 3 months after they are fully vaccinated. This is super important if we want consistency in our staff and our bus drivers and some other truly vital employees to make sure that we can continue to roll out school. Community vaccination is also important. We have members of our community who are on tonight and are very thankful that we have been mindful of their safety as well. Weather is a super important factor. We know that March typically comes in like a lion and out like a lamb. We can't have a plan that only works when the weather is nice. Unlike Santa Barbara, where it's 75 or 80 degrees and sunny every day, March in this area of the country can be spotty. We have had years where we've gotten multiple snowstorms in March. Members of the community have mentioned tents and other structures, which again are great if we're in a good weather profile. We just need to be very mindful of weather. Weather also impacts ventilation. If it's weather permitting outside, we can open windows, we can get airflow in our buildings. Our musical groups can go outside and spread out. Physical education can go outside. Weather becomes super important and a very relevant factor in basing our return plan on that. Barriers end up being super important, and being able to get polycarbonate or Lexan, which as it's called, being able to fabricate that material which meets fire code. Polycarbonate is flame retardant to some degree, unlike some other plastic materials that happen to be clear. That does meet fire code on the state level for use in barriers in schools. Ordering that and getting it in district for use is likened with trying to get Chromebooks during the summer. That material is very much in demand right now, and the timeline for being able to get that was very important for us. Being able to prepare our classroom space and our learning space, some minor construction we might need to do with taking down accordion walls and things like that, rescheduling some larger classrooms to other places in the building, making sure that where we reschedule those classrooms, we have Wi-Fi access. Lots of steps that we needed to make sure that we took care of before we rolled out a plan officially. So if we take a look individually at the three most challenging areas, one of them being the bus becomes more challenging because you'll see down below, barriers are not permitted on buses. That is a DOH violation. So our busing, for the most part, is what it is. Currently, we do have one student per seat in most scenarios in our buses. This will need to change a little bit, mostly at the middle school. At the high school, not really an issue. Where busing would become an issue at the high school is when we have bad weather. If we did have a snowstorm in March and student parking was significantly reduced, that becomes an issue. If you have more students then that need to ride the bus, it affects safety on the bus. So one of the things I want to be very clear about is that some students, particularly at the middle level, will need to sit two in a seat on a bus. There are ways that we can mitigate that a little bit, whether the student sits with somebody that they may get together in the community with on a regular basis, or somebody that they can sit with consistently. A sibling is obviously the best scenario, but then a good friend that they're interacting with outside school helps to mitigate that. But that needs to be a piece of the puzzle that parents are comfortable with. When we look at lunch, the key challenges are the same. When students are not wearing a mask and eating, we need to have 6 feet of distance, and we have had 6 feet of distance. Unlike some of our surrounding districts, both of our secondary schools only have one lunchroom, which becomes a bit problematic for us. We did receive a violation from our fire inspector in February. We had lunch tables in the hallway, specifically at our middle school, between the cafetorium and the gym. We received that violation and we were directed by the fire marshal to fix it. Desks are not permitted in hallways, and neither are lunch tables. They also did inspect to make sure that we had Lexan, or that polycarbonate, in place as opposed to acrylic or some other plexiglass type material. So that's really important to know and understand as well. Secondary schools are a little bit more complex in that we're limited in where we can overflow into, unlike elementary schools. So lunch becomes a limiting factor, but we do have a solution for that. And if your children have come home from the middle school or the high school over the last couple of weeks, they've probably shared our solution with you already. Earlier in the winter, we did order about $30,000 of Lexan, or that polycarbonate material. Our maintenance department has gotten very good at fabricating these barriers for us, and they've been working on this for several weeks. This solution is fully implemented as of today, and the barriers become a very necessary mitigation component when students are going to be eating and not wearing masks and seated closer to 6 feet in that lunchroom. Essentially, we can double our lunchroom capacity. We've also expanded, like at the high school, we're using 101. And we did purchase several outdoor picnic tables that we used in the fall, and we will use them again this spring so that students can get outside and enjoy the fresh air and expand on the grass if they want to bring blankets and so on and so forth. So here's what they look like. Here's a rectangular couple of tables at the high school. It's hard to see the Lexan because it's so transparent, but in the round table in the middle, we left the protective white coating on so you could better see what those barriers look like. And if you look on the lower right-hand corner, that's room 101 at the high school. Our maintenance staff's gotten pretty good at erecting some custom barriers for us. We go over to the middle school. Again, same issue. We have all rectangular tables over there. You can see the barriers. They're a little hard to make out, but it allows us to essentially double our capacity in our lunchroom, which is super important and vital to our expansion plan. So then we look at our instructional spaces, and our challenges remain the same. That social distancing, and whether it's 6 feet or whether it's 12 feet in terms of physical education and music, that becomes a bit of a limiting factor. And again, unlike some of our surrounding districts, our middle school doesn't have a standalone auditorium. The auditorium is also the cafeteria, so we don't have a large overflow area there. We also, unfortunately, have smaller classrooms than in some places. Our smallest classrooms are actually the front wing at the high school facing 25A. Those are our English and social studies classes and a couple of our science classes. And truth be told, in our current model, we max out at about 15 students if we're going to still abide by that 6 feet of social distancing. Again, if we install these clear polycarbonate Lexan barriers, we got to have one on each desk. We went with L-shaped barriers as opposed to U-shaped barriers. It's a little bit more less restrictive, gives students a little bit more movement. Desks are certainly going to be spaced as far as we can apart, but we know that they will definitely be within 6 feet, which is why those barriers become critical. Again, we will need to do a little bit of minor construction, removal of some partition walls. One thing that's super important, and I mentioned it in my intro, students and staff have really been rock stars with masks. That's important and super critical to this re-entry, because mask breaks will really no longer be permitted in the classroom because our students are within 6 feet and social distancing cannot be maintained. So that's something that needs to be widely understood. We may need to relocate some of our classes to larger spaces to accommodate the enrollment in a particular class, only to be used in a few unique and very limited circumstances. If we have a particularly large group of students, we may need to have a few of those students learning remotely from somewhere else inside the school. Again, we would only do this in limited and unique circumstance, and we would absolutely keep this to a minimum. And this is what those polycarbonate barriers look like. It's 1/8 inch polycarbonate. They're very sturdy. You can knock them off the desk. They don't break, they don't chip, they don't crack. They're going to serve us now, and they'll be good to go through the end of the school year. If we need them in the fall still, it's a solution that can be with us for a period of time, and they will last. We got the standard size on the bottom. Standard size is roughly about 19 inches off the desk. We did buy a number of taller versions for some taller students that are about 4 to 5 inches higher off the desk to accommodate our basketball and athletic superstars in the district. Okay, if we look at our instructional space today, you'll see at the middle school, we've removed all those extra desks. We're going to be slowly putting them back in over the next week or two. At the high school, we had tandem desks next to each other for the A and the B cohort. Now the desks will all remain in the room. We'll just spread them out as best we can to accommodate those more students that will be coming in. These two pictures are not classrooms in Kings Park, but pictures that were supplied by our vendor. So the desks look a little different, but it kind of gives you the idea of what the L-shaped barriers will look like in a classroom. Spacing may vary. We might be a little tighter in some scenarios. A very real piece to this puzzle that I want to explain, particularly for those that have not attended previous sessions. And we have found what I'm about to describe to be true in some other districts that have recently began bringing students back in 5 days a week. In our current model in hybrid, students are spaced 6 feet in just about every situation that they encounter during the school day. So as you might have seen today in my daily COVID update, we had 2 cases at the high school, but we only had 1 student in need of quarantine in addition to those 2 students. That has been very typical since the beginning of the school year for us at the high school and the middle school. As we bring more students back into school, this becomes a little bit more of an issue because the quarantine rules have not changed. And I'll walk you through a couple of scenarios in a minute. We will find in shifting to a denser student population in that school that we will have more contact tracing and more quarantines with each case. And just a quick example, not to belabor this, but we might have a class of 24 students, 2 are fully remote. Maybe we had 10 students coming in on A day and 12 students coming in on B day. All of the desks are spread 6 feet apart. Unfortunately, if we do have a case of COVID in this classroom, and we then look at the desks surrounding that particular student, they're all spaced 6 feet apart. So we don't have any additional close contacts in need of quarantine in that particular class. That's good news. Fast forward to a denser seating chart with more students in the classroom. If we look at that same class of 24 students, 2 are learning full remote. We're going to have 22 students in every day. We have that 1 COVID case, but unfortunately now these 4 students surrounding that student are all within 6 feet. They meet the definition of a close contact and unfortunately need to quarantine for 10 days. Again, just meant that we go into this eyes wide open with the understanding that we will have more contact tracing that we'll need to do at our middle school and high school, which was another reason for waiting just a little bit longer for our cases to come down in number and for that infection rate to come down a little bit more.
And Dr. Egan, if I can, and one thing I've learned recently, an area that hopefully we get further guidance on, you talk about pea soup earlier, hopefully we get guidance and consistency, for folks, for whether it's kids or teachers that have tested positive. The CDC guidelines would give you an exemption from quarantine for 90 days after you've had a positive case. Suffolk County has only adopted 30 days. So, that's again one of these areas that there's confusion, because the rules are so scattered, there's confusion around, and hopefully Suffolk County will adopt as they see fit that 90-day rule of the CDC, which again would hopefully bring down any quarantines for at least for students and staff that might have tested positive previously. But it's just another area of challenge, and people get information, and it depends on where you live and what rules apply.
And that's an excellent point, Mr. Bianco. And one of the pieces that I had included yesterday in my daily update to the community